University of Alaska report conducted over a 4-year investigation of the collapse of the building conclusively proves that it was brought down by controlled demolition.
And our founding fathers said that when there's a train of abuses and usurpations that evince a design of almost sheer despotism against the people, it's their duty and their responsibility to throw off such government. And this is where we're at. This is exactly where we're at.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report, sgtreport.com, sgtreport.tv, and a shout out to our patrons. By the way, I have a new weekend wrap, the first exclusive weekend wrap, posting tomorrow at sgtreport.tv and for my patrons, and it features my friend Frank from Quite Frankly. So we're here, friends, the 19th anniversary of the day that changed everything and woke so many of us up. And I think you're going to enjoy this interview with two patriots who are also pilots. So stay tuned. But before we begin, just a quick word about this interview's sponsor. You know, getting older isn't the most fun thing in the world. Did you know that after age 20, your body naturally decreases its collagen production by 12% each passing decade? It's a leading reason why skin appears thinner and more wrinkled as we age. Ageless Multi-Collagen provides you with the 5 types of collagen your body needs in one complete protein. You'll get powerful support for your skin, hair, nails, joints, bones, digestive system, and muscles with results you'll see and feel in just a few short weeks. And you can get Ageless Multi-Collagen for 51% off plus free shipping right now by going to healthwithsgt.com or clicking the link directly below this interview. And welcome back, friends. Thank you so much for tuning in on this 19th anniversary of 9/11, the event that woke up so many of us. I have two special guests joining us today. First, we have Dan Hanley, 35 years of flying experience. He finished out his career flying for United Airlines. And Doug Green, an Air Force air traffic controller who got his pilot's license when he was a young man. He flew the C-130 Hercules, finished his career in 2002, and then he started flying for UPS, flew 747s. These guys, between the two of them, friends, have some of the most incredible resumes of any pilots I've ever spoken with, and they know the truth about what happened on 9/11. First, Dan, welcome.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for having me on the program.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thanks for reaching out. And Doug, we've never met, but I appreciate you coming on. How are you?
It's my pleasure. I'm fine. Thanks for asking.
If I missed anything about your lengthy resume, either of you, please share with us anything that you think is pertinent. What I think is pertinent is that you both have vast flying experience as pilots, and maybe where we could start is with those crazy maneuvers that were said to happen on 9/11, where the second plane to hit the second tower made crazy aeronautical maneuvers by inexperienced pilots. And we haven't even gotten to what happened at the Pentagon. Who would like to begin, gents?
Okay, I can talk about that. Was United Flight 175. It was flown by Marwan al-Shehhi, and he approached the South Tower from the south, and he was in a slight turn, but 12 seconds before impact of the building, he makes a 20-degree angle of bank turn to precisely hit the building dead on. And had he not made that 20-degree bank turn with that angle of bank, and at that exact point, he would have missed the entire building by 800 feet. So that's a maneuver traveling. His airplane traveled faster than any of the aircraft out there at almost 600 miles per hour. And it required a split-second decision. And we contend that he was inexperienced and he didn't have the qualifications to pull that off.
Doug, in your view, as an experienced pilot, is that a maneuver you could have made? Is that a maneuver most pilots could make, just not an inexperienced one?
Well, you know, after 17,000 hours of flying time, Sean, and having flown military aircraft, fighter-type aircraft, cargo-type aircraft, and wide-body jets, if you look at the differences between the aircraft that these alleged perpetrators were trained in, the Cessna 172, which I believe both Dan and I had some initial training in years ago, the differences in the flight deck and the cockpit itself are so extreme that it's almost preposterous to believe that these amateurs could have stepped into a wide-body jet. I mean, the 757 and the 767, wouldn't be necessarily classified as a wide-body jet. The 7.6 is more of a wide-body. The 777, the 7.4, they're wide-body jets, MD-11, which I've flown all of those, and I know Dan has flown a couple of those airplanes as well. But the cockpit themselves, the automation, the autopilot systems that are linked in with the mode control panel and the lateral and vertical navigation modes linked together with the flight management computer. And this is a very, very complicated thing to train. I mean, I spent over 1 year in training to be qualified as a captain on the Boeing 777. So to think that these guys could just step in this airplane from a Cessna 172, in my opinion, is the great American lie, and it's absolutely impossible. When you consider the rates of speed that Dan had talked about, that these aircraft had accelerated to, they had exceeded their max structural limiting airspeed approximately 110 knots. And when you think about the turns that they had to make at these airspeeds, the cornering of velocity and the radius of turn, and to still hit these targets with the precision that is alleged, I believe it's impossible.
All right, before we talk about Flight 77, which we are told hit the Pentagon, and that story doesn't add up, let's stay on topic here with whatever hit the Twin Towers on that day. You know, there's a camp of people in this research that subscribes to a no planes theory. I'm not one of those people. But in your view, gentlemen, what did hit those buildings on that day? Were they military airplanes? Were they the actual passenger jets we're told they were? Were they overtaken by remote control? What is your view on exactly what happened with these planes on 9/11?
Well, I can address whether or not it was a military plane or not. You can go on the internet and find a photo. There's 4 of them, and one was taken by CNN and the other 3 by independent photographers. And all 4 of the photos show a pod on the bottom of the aircraft. Well, the 767 is smooth on the underbelly of the fuselage. So if those photos are true, if those were actually taken of the plane that hit the South Tower, it wasn't a 767. So as far as remote control aircraft go, can I give a brief introduction to our organization, Sean, and tell you what we're doing and
Please
right
do.
now?
Yeah,
Okay.
Absolutely. Please do. And if I could just make a note, friends, if you're listening to this on 9/11, I want to remind you that there is an important conference happening right now at ae911truth.org. It's a 3-day conference titled Justice Rising 9/11 in 2020. You can tune in to that right now absolutely for free at AE911 Truth. Yes, Dan, please tell us about your organization.
Okay, yeah, I currently serve as director and international public spokesperson for a global grassroots effort called 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers, whose purpose is to show that there were no Muslim hijackers at the controls of the 9/11 aircraft, but that the aircraft were electronically hijacked through employment of a system called the Uninterruptible Autopilot that enables a remote source to take control of the aircraft, autopilot, and flight management computers and fly it to its target. And once the system is engaged, the pilots cannot disconnect the system at all. They're along for the ride. So we have a website at 911pilot.org and a YouTube channel at 911 Pilots. If you want additional information for it, we have a wealth of data at those sites. So I encourage people to do that. But we can talk about the uninterruptible autopilot later if you'd like.
Well, we can talk about it now or later. I think it's extremely important because in my view, that is the most likely scenario, is that the planes were flown into those buildings by remote control, not by inexperienced hijackers. None of the details of the official story add up in my view and in the view of researchers that have tackled any of this topic, including World Trade Center 7, which collapsed at freefall speed at 5:25 in the afternoon after Jane Stanley and the BBC reported about the collapse of that building 10 minutes before it went down. Doug, your thoughts on the remote control theory? Should we go there now?
Well, you know, Dan and I have had lengthy discussions about it, trying to piece it all together. And I've done some research myself, you know, on the uninterruptible autopilot that was originally conceived long before 9/11 between a project between Boeing and Honeywell. And conceivably, in my mind, it's absolutely impossible, one, that anybody could potentially, with the level of experience these alleged perpetrators had, could hand fly an airplane with these precise parameters that Dan has often likened to driving a Jiffy, large Mack truck through a Jiffy Lube at a high rate of speed, and driving it directly through the garage without putting a scratch anywhere on the truck itself. I mean, that's impossible. Anybody to imagine such a thing would agree. And so when you consider also the research that many people have done and that I've read myself of some research analysts like Niels Harrit, who is a professor at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. He actually came to the United States when that third building, the Salomon Brothers building that you mentioned, Sean, dropped so many hours later. And the alleged explanation was due to office fires. But the structural integrity of a building like that would never fall just because of office fires. And at the site, there was mass quantities in the ash of the buildings that fell, all three buildings, of nanothermite, which is a highly explosive incendiary. And when that third building did fall, it fell so uniformly and like a controlled demolition. And so most of the people that viewed this, as a matter of fact, Sean, what's interesting to me is when I talk to people about 9/11, most people don't even know about that third building that fell.
Right. I get that a lot too. Go ahead, Dan.
If I could, Sean, I've done some background research on the uninterruptible autopilot remote controlled airplanes. And if people go to our website at 911pilots.org, there's a drop-down menu. And if you go to remote control, it takes you to our remote controlled aircraft page. And a lot of people say to me, come on, you cannot remotely control an aircraft of that size. Well, actually, remote control aircraft technology goes back as far as 75 years ago, when during World War II, in 1944, towards the end of the war, the U.S. Military launched Operation Aphrodite in Europe. And what they did was gut out old B-24 bombers to lighten the weight of the aircraft. And they loaded them with an explosive substance called Torpex, 30,000 pounds of it. Now, the pilots were required to make the takeoff with the airplane, but once they got airborne, they'd bail out of the airplane, and these aircraft were remotely guided at targets in Europe. So it's like the first example of a military drone in use, and that was 75 years ago. And we got a 5-minute video clip on the website that goes into detail explaining the system. But I'll also point out that Joe Kennedy, JFK's older brother, was killed on one of these top secret missions when the airplane blew up before he had a chance to bail out. Now, if you jump ahead 40 years to 1984, with the rapid advancing technology, especially with the advent of the computer age, NASA and the FAA conducted a joint crash test experiment in a remote location. And what they did was take a 4-engine, large Boeing 720 aircraft, loaded it with crash dummies that were wired and cameras, and without a crew or passengers on board, they flew this aircraft automatically, remotely controlled this aircraft around the pattern several times before they intentionally crash landed the airplane. We got a video on there that shows that as well. And lastly, if you jump ahead another 10 years to the mid-90s, this system Doug was talking about, the uninterruptible autopilot, we have proof that this system was developed and produced around as late as 1996, 1997 by an interview conducted by Pilots for 9/11 Truth of an avionics technician that actually worked on this system. So we know it existed prior to 9/11. And I agree with you, Sean, that when you look at the lack of experience of these hijackers and you look at the maneuvers that were performed and you look at the complexities of a 767 compared to a Cessna, the only logical alternative explanation you can come to is that they were remotely controlled. And at the bottom of that page on our website, we say, you be the judge. Was it these pilots flying the aircraft, or was it the remote control system? Because people don't realize that the navigation system on these modern day complex commercial jet aircraft is actually derived from cruise missile technology, and it's extremely accurate. If you program the flight management computers, as Doug was talking about, which is the primary navigation system on the airplane, that airplane's going to go exactly where it's programmed to that point at the speed and altitude that's programmed into the box.
Yeah, well, look, for anybody who thinks that it's preposterous that the planes could have been remotely controlled, we now live in an age of unmanned drones flying all over the world. And for those who are unaware, the U.S. Air Force has an unmanned space plane. It's the X-37B. There it is, coming in for a landing. That's unmanned, friends. Do you think that the military didn't have this technology in 2001? Boy, I guess when we get into this crazy topic, gentlemen, the thing that always comes to mind for me is who done it, which aspect of the military was involved, and maybe we can get there in this interview. But let's talk about Flight 77, which purportedly crashed in to the Pentagon after doing a miraculous corkscrew spiraling turn to find the Pentagon, and then we're told it crashed into it almost parallel with the ground, flying at what, 25, 30 feet, which seems almost impossible in my view. What do you guys make of whatever it is that hit, or what do you think hit the Pentagon on 9/11?
Well, there's four theories out there. One of them says it was American 77. Others say it was a missile. Other people believe that there was an aircraft that did a flyover and dropped an explosive on the building. And then there are people that believe there were explosives inside the building. And I've heard all the arguments, and I don't really draw a conclusion as to what I believe it was. A couple of weeks ago, David Chandler and another gentleman shared screen with me on Skype for about 2 hours, and they showed me some compelling evidence off the flight data recorder information that would indicate American 77 could have been there, and they showed me all the data that supported that and asked me to watch 12 videos, which I'm in the process of doing right now. But I also know that there were very little, if any, airplane parts in the area. So that's a mystery for me, the airplane parts not being there, or passengers or luggage or any other items related to an airplane crash. So right. To answer your question, I can't draw any conclusion as to what I believe it was, because it really is outside the scope of what we're doing with 9/11 pilot whistleblowers. We're not even addressing what happened at Shanksville, the Twin Towers, or the Pentagon, other than the maneuvers themselves and the inexperience of the pilots. So
it's actually quite interesting, and those four theories, are the ones that seem to prevail. But as you said, there was no real debris field of any sort to substantiate that an aircraft actually impacted the Pentagon with the precision that Sean stated was necessary. And once again, going back to the inexperience of these pilots, as Dan has mentioned and has stated on the 911pilots.org website, you hear the story about one of the alleged Saudi Arabian pilots that supposedly had gone to Maryland, and I believe this is true because I saw the video on Dan's website, and he attempted to rent a Cessna 172, but the fixed base operator there absolutely refused because he demonstrated that he wasn't competent enough to take off or even land the airplane. And so to believe that this is possible, that they could have done that, is highly unlikely. But what's even more interesting is, despite the fact that there wasn't a significant debris field, like there was with the United 93 flight that crashed in Pennsylvania, it was reported that they allegedly found a green passport, Saudi Arabian passport, in perfect condition, which would be highly unlikely if, in fact, this actually was an airplane moving at such a high rate of speed, almost fast enough to break the speed of sound at that altitude and to impact the Pentagon.
Well, I want to just say this, and Dan, maybe you've thought about this before, but as you're watching those videos sent to you by somebody who says the data does support the fact that that was Flight 77, an actual Boeing airline, riddle me this. Why then, if you look at the photos of the Pentagon before the roof collapsed, why is there a perfectly symmetrical hole for what we're told is the fuselage of the Boeing, but no matching holes for the engines? So if there's no entry point holes for the engines on those wings, then the engines should be outside the Pentagon on the ground, right? Can somebody explain that to me? Where are the holes for the engines? Okay, explain that one to me.
I can't. I really can't explain that. I mean, there's a lot of questions around the Pentagon that have gone unanswered with me. So I understand what you're saying, and I've heard all the arguments, Sean. But again, I cannot say with any degree of certainty what actually hit that building.
But you know, it's a good point what you just said, Sean, is that if in fact the engines, if it was an aircraft, you would think that the engines would have sheared off the pylons on impact, and that there would have been some type of a debris field with some of the remaining parts of the engines, and that just didn't exist.
Yeah, or at least holes for the engine. So look, the engines either have to be inside the building or outside the building. They can't just vanish. So, you know, and I know there's photographs of an engine from inside the Pentagon that I did see at one point, but I think it's far smaller than it ought to have been. And I'm not an expert in this area, you guys are, so you can feel free to comment on that. Or we can circle back to the buildings in New York City on 9/11 and talk about whatever hit the first building. Now, we do have that Naughty Brothers film or video of something hitting, and there's a flash. Have you guys seen that video? There's a flash just a split second before the plane hits the building. Not sure what that was, but just again, anywhere you look regarding this story, you're left with unanswerable questions. What do you guys make of that Naughty Brothers footage of that first plane hitting the first tower?
Well, that's the only footage I have of anything hitting that first tower. And they spun the camera around, I believe, because of the loud engine noise of the airplane coming inbound. But the people that claim there were no planes just say there was a huge explosion up there that they set off explosives, and that's what blew the hole in that building. So.
All right. Well, guys, I mean, this is such a vast topic. There's so many places of interest that I like to explore. I always go back to World Trade Center 7. Where would you guys like to go next? It's such a large topic. Dan?
If I could just real quickly tell you what our organization is doing. We're recruiting pilots from around the world. As a matter of fact, I just interviewed Doug this afternoon. That will be willing to testify on camera so we can collect pilot testimony to present to hopefully a U.S. attorney in New York. I am talking with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and I know you're familiar with that organization, as well as Richard Gage at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. They're not legally representing us. As a matter of fact, they say they have to remain neutral, and they're not even endorsing the work we're doing yet. But what our hope is in the future is to get enough evidence together and submit it to the Lawyers Committee in hopes that they'll legally move forward with us towards submitting evidence and other information to a U.S. attorney to force a grand jury investigation into our allegations. And just last month, I filed an FAA whistleblower report with the FAA. They acknowledged receipt of it, and they assigned a manager in Seattle to the case. So we've done a data dump on the FAA saying, hey, this is a safety issue, that we have airplanes that could possibly be remotely guided by a back door. And we want this addressed from that end, but also to investigate our allegations regarding what we're saying about 9/11. So that's where we're headed with our organization. But if you want to go on and talk about World Trade Center Building 7, we could do that.
Well, sure, absolutely. I mean, I think the whole subject is so fascinating, and I'm so glad that you and people like Richard Gage and organizations like yours and AE 9/11 Truth are trying to do the heavy lifting to get justice, because the U.S. government won't do it. The FAA won't do it. NIST won't do it. It's a little bit like Judicial Watch and Tom Fitton doing the digging into the deep state and doing the subpoenas and doing the FOIAs that the DOJ won't do, right? It always comes back to we the people. That's the only way we're going to ever get justice in this case, is if we the people keep this story alive. Dan, would you like to talk about anything specific, or should we talk about World Trade Center 7, which to me is the smoking gun of 9/11?
It is. If I could just make one comment, 9/11 was the biggest crime ever committed on American soil in its history, and it's a crime that's never been criminally investigated. Many people say, well, the 9/11 Commission explored it, but that was not a criminal investigation. And I want to point out that not one single pilot was permitted to testify before the 9/11 Commission as to the absurdity of this ludicrous notion that these pilots flew those aircraft. And we want our day in court. Pilots want their day in court, and we're going to keep the FAA and the government's feet to the fire and run the full gamut of the legal process and see if we can get justice.
Good.
I would piggyback on what Dan just said, just from my own personal experience. I actually filed a Air 21 whistleblower complaint with the U.S. Department of Labor because I was unlawfully terminated from my job at United Parcel Service for trying to enforce the safety and security of the airline. I have more evidence beyond reasonable doubt to prove that it was workplace violence and retaliation, but the Department of Labor investigator, according to an OIG investigation of the Office Inspector General, determined that the Department of Labor investigators were not complying with the 8 essential elements of investigating whistleblower complaints, like both Dan and mine. And in fact, this investigator, when we retrieved the FOIA documents, found out that he did not comply with 7 out of the 8 essential elements, which one was to interview known perjured witnesses that had lied under oath, and he failed to do so. And then he was supposed to send these documents to the FAA and the evidence for them to do an independent investigation, when in fact he did not send these documents. It was questioned, he blew it off on a whim, and then the FAA rubber stamped it in less than 24 hours, and there was never an investigation to this day. And this is what we're faced with, honest adjudication in the United States of America, because in fact, most of our regulatory agencies are now being controlled by the large corporations that are actually supposed to be being regulated. And there's been multiple FAA stories run about this, about problems in the Department of Transportation and the FAA and the Department of Labor. And when you try to get honest adjudication in the courts, the federal courts predominantly, because these are nominated positions that are confirmed by Federal Society Association, and subsequently, you know, it's just a rigged system from start to finish. I filed briefs all the way to the Supreme Court, spent over $500,000 in 7 years just to get my day in court. And as Dan said, pilots want their day in court, especially over this case and other cases in which we're trying to do our job and protect and defend the safety and security of the airline industry and the flying public. But safety's too expensive, security's too expensive, and if you do that, you will have a target on your back.
Yeah, I don't doubt it for a second. Well, look, let me do a screen share here. The corruption you're talking about is just evident everywhere we look. I think Catherine Austin Fitts always refers to Mr. Global. Mr. Global has his tentacles in everything, right? If you take a look at this article from Kevin Ryan in 2008, one of the most powerful articles I've ever read about 9/11, the top 10 connections between NIST and nanothermites. Friends, you have to read this article. It helps explain why NIST took, 6, 7, 8 years to come up with a terrible explanation for what brought down World Trade Center 7. And the reason their explanation is horrible and doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny is because they refused to look at the possibility that explosives were used to bring down any of those towers, 1, 2, or 7. It's just madness, you guys, and anybody with 2 brain cells to rub together knows it.
Right, and I'm sure you've been following it closely, but the Lawyers Committee and Richard Gage at Architects and Engineers presented the University of Alaska report that they conducted over a 4-year investigation of the collapse of the building that conclusively proves that it was brought down by controlled demolition. And just recently, just this past week, I believe, NIST said they're sticking with their previous statements. So now the Lawyers Committee is going to have to file an appeal. I forgot the time limit they have to do it, and walk all the way through this process. They'll have a separate group of people look at their appeal. But if they still stand their ground and say they stand by their original statements on this, then the lawyers committee is going to have to file suit and seek another legal remedy for this case.
Hey, Dan, could you share with Sean and the audience viewers a little bit about the initial explosion that was heard in the basement of the World Trade Center building, even before the impact of the aircraft?
Well, we're going back to the Twin Towers now, Doug, but I'll real quickly, I'm sure, Sean, you're familiar with William Rodriguez, right?
Yeah, that's the name that just came to mind. He's the one who ran down to the basement when he heard an explosion, ran down there, saw a man with, skin coming off his arms, and then he heard, like 15 seconds later, something hit the top of the building.
Right. So the explosion occurred in the basement. There were 6 sub-basements, and he was in one of them, and it occurred beneath him. And he ran upstairs and helped rescue people. He had keys because he was a janitor that maintained the stairwell, and he helped firemen up the stairs and actually helped rescue people out of the building. And they called him the last man out, the hero of 9/11. And Bush caught wind of this because he was drawing media attention to him, and invited him to the White House and gave him a hero award. And they were promising him movies. He's got to run for political office, etc. Until he had testified before the committee and said, oh, by the way, before the airplane struck, there was a huge explosion that ripped out the basement. And immediately, all of his celebrity dried up, and every politician in Washington ran away from him. But that guy has spent the last 19 years traveling the world telling his story. So our biggest enemy is the mainstream media. I mean, they've been complicit in the cover of 9/11 since the get-go, and they're still perpetuating the lies. So we're competing, and thank God we have people like you, Sean, that have programs like this that we can get on and talk to a large group of people, because we sure can't get on the mainstream media and talk about it.
Well, that's the rub about 9/11. When I was first waking up to all of this stuff close to 20 years ago, I would share video with friends in the workplace, showing them the collapse of World Trade Center 7, showing them the video of Jane Stanley reporting about the collapse of the Salomon Brothers building. Details are sketchy, but the building has collapsed. As it's standing behind her, 10 minutes later, that building goes down. That is statistically impossible. There's more to the story, and I was always rebutted by friends, quote-unquote friends, who would say, if anything you're saying is true, young, hungry journalists would be all over this story. But nothing could be further from the truth. Young, hungry journalists either don't get employed by CNN and NBC News, or if they are employed, they get marching orders. They're told what to cover, and they're definitely told what to stay away from.
Exactly. Exactly. So you've got this collusion between government and the media that have perpetuated this lie for 19 years, and we're going to have to listen more about it on the anniversary date here. And it sickens me really, because I read a statistic that 50% of the U.S. public questioned the 9/11 story, but they're not sure exactly why they're questioning it. And the more people can get out and tell their stories and get the word out. I was invited on Malaysian TV twice to talk about the uninterruptible autopilot system. One with regard to the exponential explosion of Islamophobia since 9/11, and they wanted me to talk about the uninterruptible autopilot. But then the other one was Malaysia Air 370's mysterious disappearance, and I allege that the uninterruptible autopilot was used on that. So I am trying to target outside the United States those people, the countries that were most impacted by 9/11, and that's the Muslim countries in the Middle East and South Asia. And I'm currently working on getting a documentary produced. They're going to have a film crew come into my house, and we're going to film for 3 hours. But between documentaries, books, appearing on programs such as yours, and going to media outlets outside the United States where the message, there were no 9/11, there were no Muslim hijackers at the controls of the 9/11 aircraft, resonates well with Muslims, because essentially we're saying, look, we want to absolve you from any wrongdoing on 9/11. There weren't Muslims at the controls.
Well, that's a good point, because if memory serves, I think, 7 or 8 of those supposed hijackers have turned up alive and well, and those who have been named as the hijackers in Saudi Arabia have said, no, this is me. I'm alive. I was not one of the hijackers. So again,
Right.
nothing adds up as it pertains to this story. And if we're to talk about some of the smoking guns, in your view, guys, what are some of the smoking guns of 9/11? Clearly, World Trade Center 7 is one. That's my big one, and the BBC reporting about it early. All right, that's another. How about the one where the Pentagon, one of the most heavily defended buildings on planet Earth, none of the cameras worked that day? Is that a smoking gun? What are some of the other smoking guns?
That is, and plus, there were 3 cameras. One of them was in the Virginia Highway Patrol car that captured what went in. Another was on a DoubleTree hotel, and the third one was on a Citgo gas station. And the FBI immediately came in and confiscated those cameras. So that's another smoking gun.
Sure is.
They confiscated.
How about Marvin Bush running security for the World Trade Center complex on 9/11?
Right, exactly. And you've got Barry Jennings and his testimony, and he mysteriously died. And for those who don't know who he was an African-American gentleman that showed up for work, went up to Rudy Giuliani's command post where he worked, and the office was vacated. And this is before the tires came down, and there were half-eaten sandwiches and steaming coffee still sitting on the table. And they knew they had to get out of the building, but when they came downstairs, there's more to the story. Firemen saw him and rescued him, but as they walked through the lobby before World Trade Center 7 came down, he said he was stepping over what he felt was dead bodies on the floor. That was before the building even collapsed. So I believe the Lawyers Committee has that testimony from Barry Jennings and William Rodriguez testimony and others, and they're all smoking guns.
Hey, Doug, what brought you to this fight? I mean, what woke you up? Why did you get involved? This is a messy fight. I'm telling you what, people have lost friends over saying 9/11 was an inside job or a false flag.
Well, that's a great question, and thanks for asking it, Sean. You know, I was all over the world with a perfect safety record. And actually during 9/11, I was I had departed the Louisville International Airport, and I was en route to the Anchorage International Airport, and we were already on our way to Anchorage, and the air traffic controllers had indicated to us that we should plan to land at the nearest suitable airport, which in this case it was Anchorage for us. And I tuned in the non-directional radio beacon to see if I could pick up a radio station and find out what was going on. And we just picked up some clips of it. And the more I thought about it, you know, over the years, the less I believed that this really did happen. I actually knew and flew with one of my first officers, who's now a captain at UPS, whose parents were allegedly on the American 77 flight that flew into the Pentagon. But the biggest thing for me that made me start to question things, and, you know, for us, for Dan and I, Sean, it's easy for us to question because we have experience as pilots, and just this stuff doesn't add up. I mean, I was born at night, but not last night. But for the average American, they don't know what it's like to be a pilot. They don't understand how complicated it was, and they cannot comprehend that the probability of this happening, the facts and the data exceeds the probability. They don't know this. So as you so well put earlier, the only source of information they have is line of sight mainstream media, and they're not getting the truth. And so it's time for people like us, and to collectively with people like you, to try to inform the people to start thinking for themselves. And our founding fathers said that when there's a train of abuses and usurpations that evince a design of almost sheer despotism against the people, it's their duty and their responsibility to throw off such government. And this is where we're at. This is exactly where we're at. And in my opinion, you know, I'm going to quote another founding father, Benjamin Franklin. He said, he didn't say America. He said any society that's willing to give up a little bit of liberty. And I always ask people, what's liberty to you in one word? And I said, I'm going to give you a clue. It starts with an F. And most people still can't figure out that I'm trying to get them to say freedom. When people are willing to give up a little bit of liberty for a little bit of security, they deserve neither, and they're going to lose both. Well, this is where we're at. this is, I mean, my opinion, I believe, as I've seen the workplace violence that was taken against me for trying to do my job, and that the system was broke, and that I had to spend $500,000, and I had to write briefs on my own all the way to the Supreme Court, and I was threatened by judges to shut my mouth or else, I knew the system was broke. And so my interest sparked. I reached out to Dan. I networked with other pilots that were targeted like I was for just trying to do my job. The aviation system in general is absolutely broke in the United States because of corruption. The 737 MAX is a true testimony to that. But guess what? The US government has accomplished exactly what they wanted to do through 9/11. They have put fear in the average person that sits in front of their TV with a can of Pringles and a box of Twinkies, you know, and they believe what they see. They haven't traveled across the world. They are fearful of this reported threat of Islam extremists. I've flown with countless Malaysian pilots. I've flown pilots from all over the world in the 777, some of the finest aviators I've ever flown with, some of the most faithful people to their faith, committed to their faith. It's not a faith, it's a violent faith, it's a peaceful faith. And some of the Malaysian pilots I flew with, as Dan talked about earlier, flew with the captain of MH370. It's always the pilot's fault. They always want to blame it on the pilots, and it's a bunch of garbage. And so they did accomplish this. They put fear in the American people. They instituted the Patriot Act. It's basically an act that basically violates every one of our rights under the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, especially unlawful search and seizure without probable cause. They can do whatever the hell they want. And most people don't understand this. This is the problem. Our regulatory agencies have been destroyed. The airline industry has been destroyed. Not only that, they've basically laid the groundwork to violate the sovereignty of free nations to push this defense machine. So they can provocate in Iran, they can provocate in the Persian Gulf, they can provocate in Libya. I mean, the US has their business in every country across the world. This is not democracy. And they're preaching democracy and the Western way of life. But we have less freedoms in the United States of America than just about in most countries that I've been to. That's why I live in Germany.
Well, that's interesting. I appreciate all your comments about that because I agree with you. And one of the issues we have is not just a totalitarian or tyrannical government. I mean, look at the Democrats. These people, if they get power of the White House, if they take power of all three branches of government, it's game over for the republic. It's not a democracy, it's a republic. A democracy would allow these people, the Democrats, if they get in power, to enslave or imprison all of the Republicans, okay? 51% could enslave the other 49%. That's a democracy. We don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic. The problem is, as you guys both know, and I'll do a screen share here, we've got all sorts of corporations and non-governmental organizations in the media in bed with each other to lie and to cover up the truth as it pertains to all sorts of different subjects, vaccines being one of them, the dangers of vaccines, 9/11 being another. And Popular Mechanics went out of its way for years to try to debunk the work of David Ray Griffin and Richard Gage and researchers like yourselves. And they do a horrible job. But the sheeple people, the person sitting around eating Pringles and Twinkies, if they see this debunking World Trade Center 7 and it's from Popular Mechanics, they just assume that's the truth without doing any further research. And that's why the work you guys are doing is so important, and I really do appreciate it. Dan, first you, can you tell us where people can find you and follow your work?
Yes, I'm on Twitter at DanHanley4. I got booted off Facebook for posting something about the uninterruptible autopilot. I got booted off permanently. I had 10,000 friends and followers there. I'm also on LinkedIn at Captain Dan Hanley. But for people that want to get in touch with me, and I want to address this mainly to pilots, but also to the general public, if you go to that website, 911pilots.org, we have a Join Us tab at the top of the page, and we made it as simple as possible. All we need is your name and email address. And there's a comments box down there. Sometimes the general public will make a comment cheering us on, but we're really looking for pilots from around the world who would be willing to testify on camera what we were talking about this evening to support our cause. So if there's any pilots out there listening, 911pilots.org is it. Go to Join Us at the top of the page. We'd appreciate it.
Very good. And Doug, we really
And
appreciate you, being a part of this fight. How do people follow you?
my pleasure, and just to piggyback on what Dan said just a moment ago, this is not a partisan issue at all. In my opinion, in the United States, we have one party that goes by two different names with disingenuous acts of conflict. And when the cameras turn off, they're all paid by the same dark money donors. That's my opinion. And the reason this is a problem, pilots are absolutely afraid to come out and help and give their expert opinion because of the retaliation and the consequences that would ensue for doing so. Just like in my case, countless pilots knew the truth about what was going on with the corruption between the company, working collectively with the union to target pilots that were concerned about safety and actually tried to do their job. And they were absolutely terrified to come forward and tell the truth because they knew that there would be retaliation. And this is the same thing with 9/11 pilots out there coming forward. I mean, even some of the Malaysian pilots I know, they know the truth. They have their suspicions about MH370 and 9/11, but they're afraid because of the possibilities that could affect their career. And so, I'm right in there with both of you guys. We need to continue to carry the torch and be fearless and intrepid men to try to put the truth in front of the American people and let them decide. And you can find me on Twitter at truth, the middle initial B, the last name told, truth be told, the number 4 all. I was just locked out of Twitter briefly. I'm in the penalty box because they didn't like my opinions about some of the concerns and issues on which all of our regulatory agencies and our courts are on lockdown. And but if you look at me on Twitter, all my links to my Supreme Court briefs are there, and you can find out why I'm an American forced out of my own country seeking refuge in Germany because I could never get my day in court, just like Dan and the 911pilots.org organization is trying to get their day in court. I don't know too many Americans that have $500,000 lying around that can just try to pay to get their day in court. But that's what it takes in the United States, and I still didn't get it after 7 years.
Yeah, it's so sad. Well, we pray for justice. We'll pray for you guys. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this before I let you go. I think you've each brought it up now once. That Malaysian flight, MH370. Just real quickly, in just a couple of minutes, do we want to talk about that? Because I thought that whole disappearance of that flight was fascinating. Do you guys have any theories about what happened to that flight?
Well, it made a couple of erratic turns off course. They lost communications with their radio. The radar transponder that ATC uses to identify the aircraft was switched off, and it disappeared out over the Indian Ocean. And a lot of people believe it was automatically guided to Diego Garcia, which is a small island out in the Indian Ocean, and auto-landed there. But I got a long dissertation several years ago from someone and really went into detail about who was on board that aircraft and why it was hijacked that way. So we don't have enough time in the program to go into that, but
we don't. But I think it's interesting. I've heard the theory that it had something to do with a patent, a semiconductor patent or something of that nature. Rothschild maybe being involved, and then
yes,
the patent. Is that right?
I believe there were 5 patent holders for the KL03, a microchip that Freescale had, and one of them was Jacob Rothschild. And when the 4 Chinese and Malaysian scientists that held the patent died or disappeared, I should say, Jacob Rothschild inherited the patent as a sole. That's actually what got me kicked off Facebook for security reasons, because I posted that very thing and I had 5 links supporting my allegations, and within 5 minutes I was removed. I tried to get back on 3 times with different identification, but they wouldn't let me back on. So I'm permanently banned from Facebook just from that very post.
Well, it's just an extraordinary topic. Doug, did you have any comments on that, MH370?
Actually, just listening to what Dan says, he's almost reciting the exact words of a number of Malaysian pilots that I've been flying with over the course of the last 5 years, and who personally knew the pilots involved. And Dan, I must tell you, Dan has done an in-depth amount of research on all of these topics. I've never seen a man work so hard, tirelessly to try to get the truth out, and he's doing a great job. And I personally just want to say thank you to you, Dan, in front of Sean and the audience for your endearing efforts to try to seek justice.
Well, thank you for your kind words and your support, Doug. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. I really do appreciate your time. Our guests today, friends, have been Dan Hanley and Doug Green. Dan, thank you.
Thank you, Sean, for having me on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for reaching out. And Doug, thank you for your time as well.
It's been a pleasure, Sean. Thanks so much for having us on.
Yeah, pleasure's all mine. Friends, if you're still with us, please give this a like and spread it within your sphere of influence. And if you're still hungry for more 9/11 real information right now on September 11th, head over to AE 9/11 Truth for the Justice Rising 9/11 and 2020 conference. It's free. It's a 3-day conference, and it features some of the most profoundly truthful, honest researchers and experts ever as it pertains to the 9/11 subject. You really ought not miss it. All right, guys, and for real news, visit us directly at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda and Mockingbird mainstream media lies 24/7. God bless you guys. Bye-bye.
Well, pretty soon, I think it's going to be you can't go into a store unless you've got a digital ID that proves you've been vaccinated. And that becomes so much like the mark of the beast that at this point in my book, I quote the book of Revelation on the mark of the beast. We're so close to it, you can't get much closer than that.